The desert at night is an endless stretch of black. The kind of black that eats at your headlights until it feels like you're not moving at all, just floating on a ribbon of asphalt carved into nothingness. That's what Eddie Rourke hated most about long hauls through New Mexico. He'd driven coast to coast 100 times over the years, but there was something about the desert highways that got under his skin. The silence, the emptiness, the sense that you weren't really alone, even when you hadn't seen another pair of headlights in hours. Eddie wasn't a man who scared easy. He'd driven through tornado country, snowstorms in the Rockies, even a hurricane down in Texas once. But the desert played tricks on your head. Tonight he sat hunched over the wheel of his rig, a battered Peterbilt with 500,000 miles on it, hauling dry goods out of Tucson on his way to Amarillo. The clock on the dash glowed a pale green, 12:43 a.m. He had at least 5 more hours before he'd think about pulling over. He lit another cigarette, cracked the window, and let the dry desert air rush in. "Stay awake, Eddie," he muttered to himself. "Just keep the wheels turning." He rolled into a roadside stop outside Deming around 1:30 in the morning. A glowing neon sign buzzed over the cracked parking lot. Marty's Diner, open 24 hours. Inside, the place smelled of burnt coffee and fried bacon. A handful of other truckers were scattered around the booths, their CB radios and cell phones buzzing faintly on the tabletops. Eddie slid onto a stool at the counter. The waitress, a tired-looking woman in her 40s with heavy eyeliner, poured him a cup without asking. "Rough night?" she said. "Long night," Eddie replied, taking a sip. That's when he noticed the 2 truckers in the booth behind him, talking low but urgent. One was wiry with a gray beard, the other a big guy with a trucker's cap pulled low. "I'm telling you, I seen it," the bearded one said. "Convoy of 5, maybe 6 rigs. Army trucks, old ones, like from Vietnam. No lights, no sound. Just rolling along like ghosts." The man in the cap shook his head. "Ghost trucks. You've been out on the road too long, Walt." "I ain't the only one," Walt snapped. "Ask around." "They call it the Phantom Convoy. Shows up on Highway 54 after midnight. Sometimes they turn off onto dirt roads that don't exist on any map. Sometimes they just vanish." Eddie smirked into his coffee. Truck stop legends, same as the hitchhiker who disappears when you drop her off story, or the lights in the desert nonsense. He wasn't buying it. But the big guy kept pressing. If they're real, then what are they? Ghost soldiers? Some say it's the army running black ops, stuff they don't want nobody to see. Others say it's men that never came back from the tests. Out in the desert, they tested everything. Bombs, chemicals, God knows what else. Maybe those boys are still marching. Eddie rolled his eyes. He didn't need to hear more. He dropped a 10 on the counter, drained his cup, and headed back out to the lot. The road stretched ahead like a silver thread under the moonlight. Eddie flicked on his CB, half for company and half out of habit. Static filled the cab. He was about to switch it off when a voice cut through, faint and distorted. "Convoy 2-3, move into formation." Eddie froze. He hadn't heard that channel before. He turned the dial slowly, trying to catch more. "Maintain radio silence until checkpoint." The voice crackled, then dissolved into static again. Eddie frowned, a chill running down his spine. Military chatter? At this hour? Out here? He shook it off. Probably just bleed over from some base nearby. Nothing to worry about. But as the miles ticked by, the desert seemed quieter than usual. The sky stretched wide and empty, a blanket of stars over endless scrub and sand. Not a single car passed him for nearly an hour. Then, in the distance, he saw them. A faint line of headlights. Low, steady, moving in perfect rhythm. Eddie leaned forward, squinting. They weren't semis. They weren't cars. They looked like trucks, military style, squared-off, boxy silhouettes. He slowed his rig as they drew closer. There were 6 of them, all the same model, painted in dull olive drab. They rolled silently, no engine noise, no exhaust, just a column of shadows drifting across the desert highway. Eddie tried to overtake them. He eased into the left lane, pressing the accelerator. But as soon as he drew level, the convoy shifted, 6 trucks sliding in unison, cutting him off. "What the hell?" Eddie muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. He tapped the horn. No reaction. On his CB, the static flared. Then a voice, low and mechanical. "Eddie Rourke, hold position." Eddie's blood ran cold. He hadn't said his name on the radio. He hadn't spoken to anyone. He slammed the dial off, heart hammering in his chest. When he looked back up, the highway was empty. No trucks, no taillights. Nothing but darkness stretching to the horizon. By the time Eddie pulled into the next stop, his hands were shaking. He sat in the cab for a long time before heading inside. Walt, the gray-bearded trucker from before, was here too. He gave Eddie a knowing look. "You seen him, didn't you?" Eddie didn't answer. He just ordered another coffee, staring out the diner window at the black desert beyond. Somewhere out there, the convoy was still rolling. And for the first time in his life, Eddie wasn't sure if he wanted to keep driving. The highway stretched empty for miles, but Eddie couldn't shake the memory of those trucks. The way they moved in unison, the way the CB had called his name, it wasn't the kind of thing you brushed off. By the time dawn lit the desert horizon, Eddie was exhausted. He pulled into a rest area, parked his Peterbilt, and tried to catch a few hours of sleep. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw the convoy again, those silent hulks rolling across the asphalt, their headlights faint and wrong, like lanterns underwater. When he woke, the lot was nearly empty. He sat at the picnic table with a stale sandwich and a Coke, staring at the sun-bleached map tacked up on the bulletin board. The route he'd taken the night before was marked in bright yellow. He ran his finger along it. There was nothing unusual about it, nothing marked. Yet the convoy had been there. That evening, Eddie swung back by Marty's diner. The same waitress was on shift, and Walt, the gray-bearded trucker, was sitting in the corner booth like he hadn't moved an inch. "You came back," Walt said, sliding over as Eddie approached. Eddie hesitated before sitting. "I saw something last night. 6 trucks, olive drab, no sound." Walt's eyes lit up. "That's them. Phantom Convoy. Once you see him, you'll see him again. They got your number now." "Got my number?" Eddie frowned. Walt leaned in. "You ever hear your own name on the CB?" Eddie froze. Walt nodded grimly. "They talk to you. Not in voices you'd expect, but in whispers, in static. Some truckers follow them and never come back. Others end up on roads that don't exist on any map. A few lucky ones. They get spit back out, but they're never quite right afterward." Eddie's stomach churned. He didn't believe in ghost stories, but something about Walt's tone, matter-of-fact, tired, made it hard to laugh it off. Before Eddie could ask more, another trucker cut in, a younger guy with mirrored shades. "Don't listen to this old coot," he said. "Convoy's just a story to keep rookies awake at night." Like the woman in white, or the black dog on Route 66. But Eddie couldn't ignore what he'd seen. That night, Eddie took the same stretch of highway. He told himself it was just a coincidence, that he'd been overtired before, that his mind had played tricks on him. But deep down, he wanted to know. He needed to know. The desert was even darker than the night before, clouds smothering the stars. His headlights cut only 20 feet ahead, Beyond that, the road dissolved into black. He kept his CB on low, scanning channels. For nearly an hour, there was nothing but static. Then at 1:07 a.m., the radio clicked. "Convoy 2-3, maintain formation." The voice was back, tinny, hollow, not quite human. Eddie's grip tightened on the wheel. "Target vehicle identified, Peterbilt, driver Rourke." His blood ran cold. The hair on his arm stood straight. He leaned forward, staring at the black ribbon of road ahead, and then they appeared. 6 headlights bloomed out of the dark ahead, perfectly spaced, perfectly aligned. The convoy slid into view, silent and steady. Eddie's rig trembled as he slowed, but the convoy slowed with him. He pulled into the left lane, so did they. He braked harder, dropped gears, but every time he adjusted, the convoy moved in perfect sync, boxing him in. It was like they knew his every thought before he made it. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, slamming the horn. The sound shattered the silence, echoing across the desert. But the convoy didn't react. Not a brake light, not a turn. Then one of the trucks shifted, sliding closer until Eddie could see the markings. White stenciled numbers peeling and faded on the side of its canvas. U.S. Army. But below it, black scorch marks ran along the metal as if the vehicle had burned long ago. Eddie swallowed hard, his chest tight. Up ahead, the convoy veered suddenly, turning off the highway. Eddie stared. There was no exit there, no road, just a flat stretch of desert scrub. Yet the trucks rolled smoothly onto a dirt path that hadn't been there seconds before. Their headlights cut across the sand, revealing a road lined with weathered mile markers, old and half-buried in dust. Against every instinct screaming in his head, Eddie flicked on his turn signal and followed. The asphalt ended abruptly, his rig bumping onto dirt. The CB crackled again. "Maintain pursuit, Rourke. Maintain pursuit." Eddie's hands shook. His GPS glitched, the screen flickering between coordinates that made no sense. One moment it read New Mexico State Highway 54, the next, unknown road. The desert around him shifted too. The scrub seemed thicker, the mountains sharper, the stars overhead dimming like they were being swallowed. The convoy moved deeper into the dark, their taillights glowing like embers. Eddie realized then that he'd crossed a line. This wasn't just a story. It wasn't a hallucination. He had followed the Phantom Convoy into a place he wasn't meant to see. The dirt road jolted Eddie's rig, rattling every bolt and panel. His headlights lit only a few yards ahead, the rest swallowed by desert blackness. The convoy's taillights glowed like a chain of dying coals, weaving farther into nowhere. Eddie's breath came shallow. His better judgment screamed to stop, to turn around, to get back on the highway where the world still made sense. But some stubborn piece of him, a trucker's pride maybe, or plain fear of the unknown, kept his foot pressed on the pedal. The CB hissed. "Maintain pursuit." "Eddie Rourke, Convoy 2-3 acknowledges." The voices layered, mechanical yet human, like soldiers speaking from the bottom of a well. "Convoy 2-3 acknowledges." "Convoy 2-3 acknowledges." They repeated his name again and again, until the static felt like it was crawling inside his skull. Eddie slammed the CB off. The silence was worse. He stole a glance at the GPS mounted on the dash. The screen jittered, flashing between impossible coordinates. N34.002/W106.751. Highway 54, then error, no map data. Then Route 54. Year 1972. Eddie blinked hard. The screen flickered, then went dark. The desert outside his windshield was changing too. He knew these roads, knew this land. But now the scrub brush looked wrong, thicker, darker. Rusted barbed wire fences stretched along the roadside, some collapsed, some upright, though Eddie hadn't seen a single ranch for 50 miles. And scattered along the dirt path, barely visible in his lights, were burned-out vehicles. Old jeeps, half-tracks. A tank shell lying like a carcass in the sand, its hatch blackened by fire. His stomach turned. It was like he'd driven not just off the highway, but back in time. The convoy slowed. Eddie eased his rig back, but the trucks fanned out, blocking the road. Their taillights blinked once in unison, like eyes narrowing. The lead truck swerved sharply, then accelerated, pulling ahead. The others followed. Dust boiled in Eddie's headlights. Then, suddenly, the dirt road forked. The convoy split, half trucks veering left, half right. Eddie's chest tightened. Which way was he supposed to go? His instincts screamed left. He cranked the wheel. A heartbeat later, the CB clicked on by itself. Wrong choice, Eddie. He nearly drove off the road, his rig fishtailed in the dirt before he corrected, hands white-knuckled on the wheel. The convoy he had chosen to follow was slowing again. Their silhouettes loomed larger, their olive-drab frames lit in ghostly flashes by the moon. But as he drew closer, Eddie realized something horrifying. The trucks had no drivers. Through the cracked windshields, he saw only empty seats. No hands on the wheels, no boots on the pedals. Just shadows moving faintly inside the cabs, like smoke curling in patterns too deliberate to be natural. One truck's door swung open as it bumped over a rut. Inside, Eddie swore he saw a pair of glowing eyes staring back at him from the dark. Jesus Christ. The road narrowed into a canyon, walls of red stone rising up on either side. Eddie's headlights bounced off the jagged rock, the path twisting tighter. The convoy moved smoothly through it, never slowing, never faltering. Eddie's rig, heavy and loud, struggled to keep pace. His engine whined, his tires kicked up gravel that rattled like gunfire. Then, the lead truck braked hard. Eddie slammed his own brakes, the Peterbilt screaming, the trailer swaying dangerously. He barely avoided slamming into the back of the military truck. Before he could curse, the convoy trucks ahead all snapped their headlights off at once. The canyon plunged into darkness. Eddie fumbled with his brights, but the beam barely reached. He caught glimpses, metal edges, stenciled numbers, the glint of something wet on the canyon walls. Blood? Oil? The trucks moved silently around him, headlights dead, hulks sliding in the dark. He couldn't tell how many there were anymore, 6, 12, maybe more. They shifted like a pack of wolves circling prey. The CB popped again, a whisper threaded through the static. You followed. Now you belong to us. Eddie's chest heaved. His instincts screamed that he wasn't supposed to leave this road alive. He floored the accelerator, barreling past the convoy. His headlights cut across the canyon, and for a fraction of a second the road fell away, revealing a landscape that wasn't the desert at all. Instead, he saw a wasteland of twisted metal. Entire convoys burned black. Soldiers frozen mid-scream, their faces melted into bone and ash. The sky above was orange, split by streaks of fire. Then, in a blink, it was gone. The canyon walls closed in again, the convoy's taillights burning like coals behind him. Eddie's mind reeled. He didn't know if he was hallucinating, if exhaustion had broken him, or if he had driven through a window into some other place. All he knew was that the convoy wasn't letting him go. The canyon spat Eddie out into a wide desert basin. The road beneath him was cracked asphalt now, not dirt, but it looked wrong, like it hadn't been driven on in decades. Faded yellow lines peeled up from the surface. Half-buried mile markers stuck up like crooked tombstones. And ahead, the convoy waited. 6 trucks stood in a perfect line across the road, headlights glowing dim yellow like lanterns seen through smoke. Their engines still made no sound. They didn't idle, didn't rumble, didn't stir dust. They just stood. Eddie slowed, his heart thundering in his chest. His Peterbilt shuddered, brakes squealing. For the first time in his life, he considered abandoning the rig and running into the desert. The lead truck's door creaked open. Eddie held his breath. A figure climbed out. It wore an olive-drab uniform, sleeves ragged, boots half melted. A helmet sat crooked on its skull-like head. Its face was nothing but shadow, except for two pale eyes that burned faintly, like the glow of a dying cigarette. One by one, the other trucks opened. Figures stepped down, boots crunching softly on the brittle road. They moved with rigid precision, like a drill team long dead but still marching. Their uniforms were scorched, their rifles slung but rusted. Eddie's mouth went dry. These weren't soldiers. Not anymore. They were echoes. Men burned out of time, still locked in orders they could never complete. The convoy spread out, encircling his rig. The CB radio, off, dead, disconnected, lit up green. Driver Rourke, unit identified, target acquired. The voices layered, dozens, maybe hundreds, all speaking at once. Male and female, young and old, every accent blurred together in mechanical rhythm. Convoy 2-3 welcomes you. Eddie slammed the CB off. The light stayed on. The voices kept coming. You will not leave the road. You will complete the march. You will not leave the road. The repetition pounded his skull, syncing with his heartbeat. Eddie's headlights flickered. For an instant, the basin wasn't desert anymore. It was a battlefield. Sandbags collapsed in trenches. Barbed wire stretched across blasted dunes. Men in uniform crawled, screamed, burned. Tanks lay in heaps, their turrets twisted. The air stank of cordite and ash. Eddie gagged. He blinked hard. The vision was gone, but the soldiers were still there, circling closer. One pressed its face to the glass of his driver's side window. Up close, Eddie saw that its skin was nothing but parchment, stretched tight, cracking. Its mouth opened, but no sound came, only the echo of static, as though its throat were a radio speaker. Eddie roared and slammed the accelerator. His Peterbilt surged forward, trailer whipping as he threaded between two trucks. The soldiers didn't react. The convoy didn't chase. For a fleeting moment, Eddie thought he was free. The road stretched ahead, black and endless. The GPS flickered back to life. Highway 54, eastbound. Relief flooded him. Then, his headlights lit the horizon, and there they were. The convoy, again. Same 6 trucks, same perfect formation. They hadn't moved. Or maybe he hadn't. Panic clawed at his chest. He slammed the brakes, the tires shrieking. The convoy shimmered, taillights burning through the dust. And in that instant, Eddie understood. He wasn't driving through the desert anymore. He was trapped in their march. His body felt heavy, his eyelids dragging. The steering wheel vibrated like a heartbeat, like it belonged to something alive. The CB whispered softer now, almost coaxing. Fall in line, Rourke. The march never ends. Fall in line. Eddie's rig began to slow on its own, pedal fighting him. The convoy ahead shifted, opening a gap, inviting him in. His hands trembled. His mind screamed to fight, to resist. But another part of him, deeper, quieter, wanted to obey, to fall in, to let the road swallow him. He could almost see it. Himself behind the wheel forever, headlights dimming, face hollowing, flesh peeling away until he was just another shadow in the convoy. He gritted his teeth, slammed his boot down, and forced the Peterbilt into a growl. The engine screamed, straining against something unseen. The soldiers around him didn't move, they only watched. their pale eyes flickering in unison. For hours, or minutes he couldn't tell, Eddie drove, heart hammering, sweat soaking his shirt. The desert outside warped and shifted, sometimes the basin, sometimes battlefield ruins, sometimes highways that should have been hundreds of miles away. At one point he saw a billboard for a gas station that hadn't existed in 30 years. Its paint was fresh, its lights still glowing, though the desert around it was black. Another time he passed a rest area filled with trucks, dozens of them, rigs and trailers parked neatly. But every single cab was empty, every window black. The convoy never left him, sometimes behind, sometimes ahead, sometimes both. Always watching, always circling. Eddie's mind began to crack. At last, he understood. These weren't ghosts, not exactly. They were men erased, swallowed by something the government had unleashed out here decades ago. Soldiers who had marched into some weapons blast zone, into a test that went wrong. Men who would never come back. Their bodies were ash, their names long forgotten, but their orders lived on. They were still marching, still waiting for someone to fall in line. And now, they wanted him. Eddie's knuckles bled white on the steering wheel. His Peterbilt roared, gears grinding as he forced it forward. But no matter how far he drove, the convoy was always there, sometimes behind him, sometimes ahead, sometimes both at once. His eyes ached. The desert blurred at the edges. He didn't know if he'd been on this road for minutes or days. The clock on the dash flickered nonsense. 3:14, 12:07, 7:59. Numbers that refused to hold steady. The CB whispered endlessly. Fall in line. The march never ends. Convoy 2-3 acknowledges. Rourke, you are one of us now. Destination classified. Mission eternal. Eddie shook his head, snarling through clenched teeth. I ain't yours. You hear me? I ain't yours. The headlights flared ahead again, 6 pale orbs lined in perfect formation. The convoy stretched across the road, unmoving, waiting. Eddie's rig screamed as he tried to stop, brakes squealing, tires smoking. His headlights cut across their frames, burned, rusted, stenciled with fading white letters. USA RMY. Some bore bullet holes, some looked half-melted, and then, impossibly, they lit up. Engines silent, they surged forward. 6 trucks bearing down on him, their speed impossible, their pale lights blinding. Eddie's heart pounded. He cranked the wheel, trailer fishtailing as he swerved into the desert scrub. The Peterbilt jolted violently, bouncing across uneven ground. His teeth rattled. His chest slammed against the belt. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. He plowed through brush, rocks smashing beneath his wheels, until the road vanished completely, and all that remained was sand and night. The trucks followed, silent, swift. They cut across the desert like phantoms, never slowing, never faltering. The CB flared one last time, a voice booming louder than it had before, rattling his teeth. Rourke! Destination reached. Join us. His headlights flickered, then burned out. For a heartbeat he was blind. And then, light. A horizon of pale gold split the desert, dawn spilling across the sand. His headlights snapped back on, weaker now but steady. The Peterbilt shuddered, coughing, and then rolled forward onto familiar pavement. Highway 54. The convoy was gone. The CB hissed once, then fell silent. Eddie pulled into a gas station just outside Alamogordo, his body trembling, his throat dry. The attendant, a young man in a dusty baseball cap, stared as he stepped inside. Sir? Are you okay? Eddie nodded numbly. Just long haul. Need coffee. The kid hesitated. You sure about that? Folks said you've been missing 3 days. Eddie froze. Truckers were asking about you, the kid went on. Said you left Deming 3 nights back. You never showed. 3 days? Eddie's last memory was the night before. He glanced at his watch. The date had jumped forward. His chest went hollow. Hours later, Eddie sat back at Marty's diner, a steaming mug untouched in front of him. Walt slid into the booth across from him, his eyes dark. "You seen him again," Walt said quietly. Eddie nodded. "They don't let you go," Walt continued. "Not really. You're marked now. You'll hear him again. On lonely roads, in the static. Maybe tonight, maybe in a week. But they'll come back. They always do." Eddie's hands shook around his mug. He thought of the convoy's headlights, the soldiers' pale eyes, the way time had slipped from his grasp. He didn't argue. He knew Walt was right. That night, Eddie pulled his rig onto another stretch of desert highway. The road ahead was empty, the sky wide and star-swept. His CB sat dark on the dash. He told himself he wouldn't turn it on. But as the miles rolled by, the silence grew unbearable. His hand trembled. Against his own will, he flicked the switch. Static filled the cab. Then, "Convoy 23 acknowledges. Driver Rourke." Eddie's breath caught. Far ahead, at the edge of his headlights, faint orbs bloomed in the dark. 6 lights in perfect formation, waiting. And that was the story of the Phantom Convoy. A column of ghost soldiers forever locked in formation, waiting for the next driver foolish enough to follow their lights into the dark. If you ever find yourself out on Highway 54 late at night, and your CB crackles with voices you don't recognize, do yourself a favor. Don't answer. And whatever you do, don't fall in line. If you enjoyed tonight's tale, please take a moment to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to Campfire Horror Stories. Every click helps keep the fire burning, and it truly means the world. And remember, out here on the open road, not every set of headlights belongs to the living.